I find Paul to be a fascinating character. I think
Mhm.
that the exploration of the Black experience in Los Angeles during that time period is not something that is often discussed. So, can you tell me just a little bit of what you find intriguing about the character?
Well, there's some like what you said. It was nice to dig into the our presence in LA, Black presence in LA during the 1930s. We were 8% of the population. We weren't very many. They still found a way to kick us in the face, but there weren't very many of us. So one, just exploring that, knowing that there's not many places that he can reach for safety. There's not a lot of people. Central Avenue is pretty much the community. And that what that kind of compression means for him is my favorite thing to explore, in particular in the second season, is what happens when there's nowhere to go and you are your only sustenance. And you don't trust your wife for some reason, even though she's the most supportive. He just doesn't trust anybody in this moment because he wants to do so well. Such an enormous amount of pressure to be a Black man, period. But in the 1930s, Paul, I mean, like, it's an impossibility.
So, in episode two, we see that Perry is, looking out for Paul in a way, or standing true to some of what he said with, his wife's encouragement. So, do you think that Paul believes that there's a way that all of these people, well, that Perry actually has good intentions for him?
I think that Paul believes that, I think more so than Perry, like you said, it's Clara that gets Paul to get his shit together. Clara has a moment where she says, if you don't like it, do something about it. And I take that as Paul's turning point, because he's been knocking on these white doors when he was a regular cop, a beat cop. And so Perry represents a guy who, sure, Perry has great intentions, but intentions and follow through, especially as a white dude in the 30s, I don't expect much from him. I expect bare minimum, and he barely meets that qualification. I think we have a hard time this season with finding what it means for a white dude in the 30s to be generous to anybody but himself, because we look back at the past and we forget how savage they were. We're savage now. So imagine back then when nigga was just, you could say it and Black people would answer. You know what I mean? Like, so no, I don't know that he believes that Perry will follow through, but it's his only option, or not his only, it's his best option. Something about Perry Mason does inspire Paul, because he really is trying. He's just such a mess, but he really is trying to be a good dude. I'm not sure if I answered the question.
You did. No, you did. I appreciate that. So, we're introduced to the character of Perkins, and
Mhm.
um, who is beneficial as present to the community. And you see Paul there, for some reason at the insistence. How does Paul feel about the fact that being, whether it's an investigator or working for the police, there will be times where he's pitted against his own? And how does he walk that line?
Oh, gosh, let me tell you. One thing Paul does not intend to ever do is be pitted against his own community. That is a thing that I believe. Paul believes that, for some reason, that sweet guy, he believes that Strickland is not going to screw him over. Strickland is close to Perry. Maybe Perry hooked me up with this job. So, like, I don't like working. He doesn't like working with that entity, the DA, because he's been in that system. But he definitely thinks, like, okay, we're just gonna, pat him on the shoulder, get him to straighten up a little bit. Because I believe when Paul was a beat cop, I believe Perkins existed and Paul left him alone, because he's like the godfather of Harlem a little bit, He's like, I mess stuff up, but I fix a lot. I give people turkeys. I take care of people. And I think Paul had a relationship with that in Central Avenue. And then in the second season, when he has to go against it, whoo, it'll lead to a lot of discovery of Paul, for whose side is Paul on, and what does it mean to be on someone's side, and what is the consequence of, accidental actions. You know what I mean? I think it weighs on him the length of the season even.
So, in thinking of that, as Paul's set up, we have his wife. He's in this situation where he's living with his in-laws, trying to work through that. Do you think in this moment that Paul is desperate?
Oh, yeah. I think Paul is incredibly desperate. He trusted, gosh, Paul is just trying to be a good boy. And I hate to say that, but he really is. He's trying to be the good Negro. By being the beat cop, just being a good dude. Perry pulls him out of that. And now he still has a lot of those habits of performing for white favor, which he unlearns throughout this season. But as he's living in a tiny little spot on the floor in the corner of his brother-in-law's home, yeah, he's desperate. He hates his life. He hates how much he disappointed his wife. He hates how Mo looks at him. He hates being corrected by Pearl. Like he's a man that's seen freedom and now he's trapped again. So yeah, he's incredibly desperate. And I think we'll get more and more so ravenously desperate as the season continues.
So thinking down the line, this particular season involves the Mexican community here in Los Angeles.
Mm-hmm.
That is something Black and brown in Los Angeles that we see has always been sort of strained. Do you think that Paul is taking an opinion on any of this? Do you think he looks at Perry in any sort of way?
I have a lot of opinions about this. I wonder. I think Paul's question is always, but what if they were Black? But what if the defendants are Black? And like Brown ain't Black. It ain't Black. You know, I think Paul sees a kinship in that community, and that's why he's like, it's just too many people getting screwed over. Whole communities getting destroyed by the same force. And still, there's this Black presence that is heavily neglected. So I can't remember your question, but I know Paul knows that Brown ain't Black. He knows Brown ain't Black. It
was about Paul's feelings about, that community as far as it relates to what Perry's doing. So you covered it.
Yeah. And it's not like those communities, it's not like, kumbaya, all communities that aren't white are together by any means. They're suffering their trauma. We're suffering our trauma. And we haven't gotten to some collective trauma yet. We're still like, all right, but stay over there. And you're taking a couple jobs from my people. And, because we're still all at the bottom of the totem pole. So I think there's still a tension about it too. I think there's still a tension about that. But seeing anyone suffer is not for Paul.
So for this season,
tell me.
Spoilers, but what do you think his biggest challenge will be to overcome?
His own ego.
His own ego.
I think Paul's dilemma is being willing to unlearn what he's learned and find a new way to live in order to survive and thrive, not survive anymore, thrive, because he's going to be facing a lot of temptation, and watching people misbehave and never get caught it might become addictive.